I covered the university through its very first inceptional years with the legislature and with the political aspects of getting it started and construction underway. There was talk floating around for a long time, even in the 80s, before anybody was really serious about it. There were a few community leaders who knew we had a branch here then from the University of South Florida. They said, that's not adequate, we need our own university. But it wasn't until maybe 1990 that everything came together to make it happen and make it serious with the legislative involvement.
I happen to have been fortunate enough to be one of the proponents of Florida Gulf Coast University. Early in my legislative career, I was elected in 1982, and our efforts to build this university were underway really by 1985, 86, somewhere along there. And ultimately, in the late 80s, we really showed some tremendous progress in terms of building a university and breaking away from USF.
There was a local group headed by Tommy Howard, Lloyd Henry, Wayne Miller. A number of those businessmen strongly advocated for a larger presence of higher education in our area. And the way they were able to do that was through a branch of the University of South Florida, which is actually headquartered in Tampa. It was 125 miles from their main campus. A lot of the funding that went to, we thought, to Fort Myers wound up being reallocated to the Tampa campus. And a big part in the FGCU founding was a national study that found that regional campuses that are located more than 50 miles from their main campus are rarely successful. It is simply too far to travel.
A more serious effort occurred when Charlie Edwards was appointed to the Board of Regents, and Fort Myers had its own member. And Charlie orchestrated a study which would look at the university system as a whole, try to identify the needs of the state university system in areas which might be currently underserved by higher education that's offered in the state of Florida. And through that study, it not surprisingly indicated that Southwest Florida was an area where young adults were not being served appropriately through higher education. Now, it's very interesting. USF saw it quite differently, but the study came back and said there's a gap, and the gap could be addressed by the creation of a new institution. And that gave us really the firepower, the ammunition, if you will, to begin to make a political argument in Tallahassee that a new university was needed. It needed to be built in Southwest Florida. And for the better part of a decade, we made that case in Tallahassee until the institution opened its doors in 1997.
When I joined the Board of Regents and was looking at the statistics, we noted that students who start at the community college, as compared with the student who starts at the university, the community college student does not fare as well in terms of completion. So we knew that in order for the state of Florida to bring its numbers up to award more baccalaureate degrees, this was an excellent way to increase the access to higher education. So the community was very pleased, very happy, welcomed the university with wide open arms in many different ways: support, loyalty, financial support, speaking about it in every way that it could. And it has, and I think what we see today is really the outpouring of the community support from the very beginning.
The first ones I recall would have been maybe around 1990 when they were seeking the legislative approval, which was the very first absolute step that had to be done before anything else could happen. The legislature had to approve a new 10th university, and they had to allocate the money for it. And that took, I think, one session. They talked a little bit about it. It didn't happen. But in 1991, it did happen. As I said before, it was a lot of the political stars were aligned. We had the horsepower in Tallahassee in the legislature, and our population had grown to that point. There was a recognition it would grow larger, so people were not totally okay with it, but that's when they approved it.
There was no formal procedure in the state as to how you go about establishing a new university. All of our new universities up to the establishment of Florida Gulf Coast, and everyone since then, have been based on politics. And it didn't take me long to realize that although we had excellent representatives from our area, we were fighting Broward County and the Melbourne-Fort Pierce area, both of which had much larger legislative delegations than we did. But the concept that we had to sell was not that we would be a 10th university. We were going to be a different university, a new university for the 20th century. We weren't going to have tenure. We were going to push, which I had in my day, we had Saturday and night classes. We wanted to create an opportunity for students who worked to have a full-time job and still be able to graduate in 4 to 5 years.
Probably the biggest difficulty we had early on was fighting the east coast of Florida, and specifically Broward County. If you look at where the universities, state universities are, you have Florida International University in Miami-Dade County, and you have Florida Atlantic University in Palm Beach County. But Broward, in between the two, Fort Lauderdale, did not have its own state university. There was great interest from Broward County. But Broward was sort of the hole in the donut, and students had access immediately to the south and immediately to the north, a 30-minute drive either direction, whereas for us, we did not have that access. It was a 2 or 3 hour drive in either direction to access a freestanding institution. And in all of us really on this coast, the delegation from Collier, the delegation from Charlotte, put together, all 5 of us as we consider the 5 counties of Southwest Florida. The delegations from those 5 counties didn't even compare to the size of the delegation from Broward. And yet, I felt we had the right political arguments on our side, the right policy arguments on our side. And so did the leadership of the House and the leadership of the Senate. They bought into the thought that we really were underserved.
We had to sell them. You realize that we had 9 existing state universities. There's never been a university that thought they were properly funded. Always never enough money. Consequently, a 10th university didn't necessarily create a bigger pot, but it created more people eating from the same pot. So their concern was that it would affect their finances, which is a fair concern.
I remember the passage of the bill, and it was sort of last minute, and it was not that big of a deal up there. And I was up there at that time. The news press had me in Tallahassee all the time covering it, and everybody was happy. They were glad that was a big deal, but it wasn't. It was here at home that there was a lot more uproar about it.
Well, May 4th, 1991. I called Governor Childs and I said I'd like to have a bill signing ceremony for the bill once it passed the legislature. And he said, where would you like it? And I said, in Fort Myers. So he traveled down to Fort Myers and in downtown on the steps of the Lee County Courthouse. We had a big table set up. We had dignitaries from across the state invited. Several hundred people were there, and he signed that piece of legislation into law. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I still have the pen he used to sign that with, as well as a picture of the day when he was actually signing the documents. But we had more obstacles even after the signing of that bill in 1991.